So now on to the main event. I am super pleased to welcome our speaker, Dr. Laurie Mischley, back to this program. Dr. Mischley is a pretty much world-renowned naturopathic clinician. She is a researcher, she is a writer, she is an educator who is focused on finding the answers to making Parkinson's reversible and preventable. So Dr. Mischley has spent the past 2 decades studying people with Parkinsonism and is working to find better ways to measure, to monitor, to predict, and prevent PD. So today she's going to talk about her findings and give you some tips and tools for tracking your own PD and discuss why the heck you would want to do that. So welcome, Laurie. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time and sharing all of this great information today.
Thank you for the invitation to be here.
So I am going to disappear and I will come back to help moderate the Q&A. So if you find questions come up during the discussion, just type that into the Q&A function and we will help try to answer all your questions. So again, thank you for being here, all of you, and I'll see you towards the end of the program.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here live today. This is being recorded for those of you who can't make it live. I told my 16-year-old son I was giving this talk yesterday, and he asked what the topic was. And I said that I was going to try and convey to all of you that you are different than each one of you is different. And that because each one of you are different, you have different goals and you have to communicate your symptoms differently. And he told me that that is such a simple concept. If I think it's going to take me an hour to teach you that, I better stall and spend a long time on my introduction. So we are going to get into the weeds a little bit here with evaluating your Parkinson's disease. Why would you want to do that? How do you do that? And when is the best time to do that? Very briefly, my disclosures are I run a center called the Parkinson's Center for Pragmatic Research. We have 2 projects going on, a canine Parkinson's dog detection for early Parkinson's and the Parkinson's symptom tracking app. I designed the scale that we're going to talk about a little bit today. I don't make any money off of it. It's available freely. But I do research at Bastyr and University of Washington, and my private practice is at Seattle Integrative Medicine. So these are my affiliations and disclosures. So big picture, my very first yoga teacher on my very first day of class said, you need 3 things in life. That's it. You need to know where you're at, where you want to go, and a map. And then a patient with Parkinson's said, you also need motivation. You need fuel to get there. You need some sort of inspiration because that doesn't always come easily. So I've added a 4th thing that I think you need to get your needs met. My goal today is to focus on number 1 and number 2. Many of you have heard me speak before about the map. How do we get to where we want to go? But today it's really important to take a step back and talk about just getting clear with about where we're starting and setting some goals about where we want to go. So simply, how do you know where you are currently at? Each one of you is going to have a different set of goals. Parkinson's disease is not one thing. There's not one, it's not like if you get strep throat, there is one antibiotic that we give you. It's not like that for Parkinson's. Some of you have constipation, some of you have pain, some of you have rigidity. Some of you are 95 years old and just got diagnosed last week. Your priorities are going to be very different than if you're 45 years old and your goal is to watch your kids have kids. Some people don't want to live to be 100. Some people would be happy if they make it to 70. Some people want to spend every day of their life as close to A+ quality of life as possible. Some people are actually okay with the C or B. You each need to decide what you want out of the life you have been given. Because the truth of the matter is, the higher your standards, the better outcomes you want, the harder you're going to have to work for it. We are living in a very exciting time right now where in our lifetime, many of you, since the time you've been diagnosed until today, are seeing the definition of Parkinson's changing. 20 years ago, when I started studying, working with Parkinson's disease, that picture in the center is all we knew. Now, when you talk about Parkinson's, it is so exciting to hear people talk about premotor Parkinson's disease, preventing Parkinson's, early detection, non-motor symptoms. And we have people like Jimmy Choi and Rocksteady Boxing and Pedaling for Parkinson's and Dance for Parkinson's, where an entirely new personality and stereotype is starting to be associated with Parkinson's. And we are living, and each one of us is actually playing a role in the redefinition of this disease. So this is one of the points I really want to drive home. In Parkinson's disease, when you ask neurologists to describe or define Parkinson's, they will say rigidity, tremor, stooped posture, right? Slowness. When we ask patients about their symptoms with Parkinson's disease, it is not the motor symptoms that rank top. The most prevalent symptoms, the most common symptoms in Parkinson's are actually many of the non-motor ones: fatigue, handwriting impairment, loss of smell, cognitive dysfunction, muscle pain, daytime sleepiness, urinary and sexual dysfunction. Many of these symptoms are more prevalent and often more severe than the motor symptoms. In fact, our data, according to the scale that we're using as we have it set up, non-motor symptoms make up about 2/3 of the overall disease burden. And that 2/3 statistic seems to hold up for about the first 20 years of this disease. I, as Jen has said, have been working with Parkinson's disease for 20 years now. Over the course of my career, I have probably seen at least 3,000, probably closer to 4,000 patients with Parkinson's. It is my clinical impression that Parkinsonism is a vague, fluctuating, nonspecific, ever-changing, constantly morphing roller coaster of stuff. Some of it is mildly annoying, some of it is severely debilitating. But each one of you is navigating this very variable course. Every one of you has something slightly different. And I'm going to tell you, I think most of you are playing whack-a-mole. One symptom pops up, you get a little constipated, you take a little Miralax and some fiber and drink a little water, and now you're dealing with some sleep issues. And we take a little melatonin and cannabis and meditate at bedtime. And we have this ever evolving roller coaster of new symptom here, treat it, new symptom there, treat it. And it's essentially a game of whack-a-mole. You get a new symptom, you try and hide it. And this is how Parkinson's has been managed for the last 200 years, right? We are essentially playing a defensive game. You have new symptoms, you go to the doc helps you hide those symptoms. Where most of you, I think, could stand to improve your strategic game a little bit is by playing better offense. Any winning team doesn't only need a strong defense, you absolutely need a strong defense. I'm not suggesting you abandon your defensive strategy, but I'm saying there is no way to become a championship winner if you do not also have a very strong offensive game. So what I would like to ask all of you to do is imagine yourself as the coach in charge of your team's offensive strategy. You're the coach, and I need each one of you to tell me, what's the plan? What is your plan for winning this game? So as I said, we start with where we are. So carrying that paradigm or that example forward, figure out who's on your team. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What are they good at? What are your own strengths and weaknesses? What happens when one of the players gets taken out of the game? How often do you have team meetings? How do you keep communication on the team? You are in the driver's seat and you are the boss, and it is your job to figure all of that out, not your physicians. You are the boss and we are working for you. Every time you go to your doctor's office, you are employing us to give you our opinion. It is up to you whether or not you take that opinion. What you do with the information we give you is completely and totally up to you. You should be adding physical therapists and yoga teachers and pickleball partners and neurologists and naturopathic docs and massage therapists, just like you were building your team. So before we get into some of these, how do you track your symptoms questions, I want you to appreciate how lost and untethered really most of you are. I just want to go through a list of questions, and I want you to think for yourself, how easy would it be for you to answer these questions? 1 year ago, what were your most debilitating symptoms? In the past year, which of your symptoms have gotten better, and which ones have gotten worse? Since you were diagnosed, what has been the average rate of your progression? How do your symptoms compare to other people, your age, gender, and your income bracket who were diagnosed at the same time as you? When you started medication, dopamine-based meds for levodopa, what are the symptoms that got better? And which ones improved the most? And most importantly, how do you and your Parkinson's docs and providers set goals? So I am here to talk to you today about ways that it's honestly really, really easy for every one of you to have all of these answers at the tip of your finger. We now have the tools available to us that you could, with the push of a button, answer all of these questions really quite easily. So let me show you how. Very briefly, there are a couple rating scales that have been used for many, many decades. Hoehn-Yahr is the one that is most common. It goes 0 to 5. 5 is bedridden. The reason we can't use Hoehn-Yahr in clinic there are a lot of reasons. One, it doesn't always go in order. You can sometimes get 3s before 2.5s. 1 almost doesn't exist by the time most people are diagnosed. Neurologists can almost always pull out some symptoms on the other side. So you kind of go from 0 to 2 by the time you're diagnosed. And it can take 5 to 8 years to move from a 1 to a 2, right? So that's not a useful scale in clinic or research because you can't watch it change. In clinical research, we're more likely to use something called the UPDRS, the UPDRS. Most of you have experienced this with your neurologist. I don't think there's a person in this audience who after having the UPDRS performed on them would say, that sure does represent the overall severity of my disease, right? And it's a snapshot, and it really is designed to capture motor improvement, and it does that really well. So the part where part 3 of the UPDRS does an excellent job looking at response to dopaminergic meds. But because it is so symptom focused and motor focused, it's not a useful outcome measure early in the disease when people don't have a lot of motor symptoms. The other thing that kind of stinks about this scale is it's a 0 to 4 point scale. So you need a 20-point change to go from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 1, which means in clinical research, any therapy that shows a 15% improvement, we're going to miss. It's going to look negative, even though it was positive, because it wasn't positive enough. And then the last problem that we run into with this scale is even if we see a little bit of improvement or worsening, it's hard to tell where, in what domain was that worsening. The scale isn't really designed to be able to tell us where the problems were. So I want all of you, as I said, we're all going to have slightly different goals, but I think it's pretty universal to say most of you want the fewest possible symptoms, the highest possible quality of life for as long as possible. I think most people would pretty much be on board with those 3. But each one of you are going to have your own goals above and beyond that. I want to have fun. I want to be helpful. I want to be a part of a community. I want to be able to play with my grandkids. I want to be able to keep up with my old work buddies who are really quick-witted and sharp. I want to make sure I stay on top of my cognitive game. Every one of you is driven and motivated by different goals, and that's all really important for our strategy. The scale that we designed started with this idea that we needed something that everyone could universally agree on. And that is, if you get your score and you score a 0, everybody is happy. What we do is we ask, on average, over the last 7 days, how severe have each of these symptoms been? If the symptoms are not severe, you slide the tab to the left. If they're debilitating and horrible, you slide it to the right, and then you pick your space on the slider bar. The goal, we can all agree, is if you can go through this whole list of 35 symptoms of Parkinson's and say, I don't have dyskinesia, I don't have tremor, my balance is all the way to the left, no balance problems, no body temperature problems, I don't get dizzy when I stand up. If all of these tabs go to the left, your score is a 0, and I think we're all happy, right? So on the right is the data set that we are seeing in our research. Over the last 8 years, I have now been following 3,000 people from many, I think we're at 18 different countries right now. But what we are seeing is the average person at diagnosis has a score of about 550 and is increasing at about 40 points per year. It's not a completely linear slope. It looks like there's the first 5 years might be the faster progression, and then maybe disease progression stabilizes a little bit before it picks back up again. You can see on this chart that if you see on the bottom right, it says 10, that's 10 years post-diagnosis. You extended that line up, you see that's where people's quality of life tends to go from good to fair. Not everybody, we're going to talk about that in a second, but on average, most people, the average person gets about 10 good quality of life years post-diagnosis. And I'm here to tell you, I think we can do better than that. So I look at every single one of my patients' scores before I see them in clinic, and I'm telling you, I treat people differently. Just the way a school teacher treats a patient who's getting a D, or a student getting a D, differently than a student who's getting an A. Every one of you is different and needs to be treated differently. So that line running through the center is average. If your dot is above the line, it means you are worse than average. If your dot is below the line, it means you are doing better than average. That person on the top left is going to have an entirely different clinic visit, conversation, treatment plan, follow-up plan, set of labs, physical exam, than that person on the top right, who's 1/3 as symptomatic as most of their other friends 5 years post-diagnosis. So we are starting to be able to develop these tools that allow us to not only know where are you starting from, but communicate this to your provider. So I'll talk about the different apps and things in a minute, but the one on the left here, the APDA has a symptom tracking app, and we have the Parkinson's symptom tracking app that we built. And they both serve a very similar function. They have different strengths and weaknesses, but we both are providing you with tools that allow you to communicate with your physicians where the burden of disease is and how severe it is. It really helps when you can start to quantify your symptoms. Instead of going to your doc with a list and say, I'm stiff, I'm slow, I'm constipated, and I'm not sleeping well. If you can walk in and have a list of 35 different symptoms and each one has a numerical rating for your severity, both you and your provider are going to be able to provide better care. Fewer symptoms slip through the cracks. We are more likely to talk to you about things that you don't bring up. Patients do not bring up urinary dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, loss of smell. There are things that just don't get priority in clinic. And I find that when people come in with their quantified symptom list, we give them that priority. In clinic, every single one of my patients, I go into work early before I start my clinic day, and I look at every single person's symptom severity score. I see how they're doing today. I see how they were doing when I last saw them, and I look at how their scores have been changing over time. I can look down at the bottom right and see, I don't need to worry about this patient. They may have had a little rocky start, but they've figured it out and they're doing really, really well. This visit is going to be easy. We're just going to fine tune a couple things. Whereas a patient who all of a sudden has a really high score, I might make a little more time for and know that they're going through some things and we need to get to the bottom of it. Here's just a zoomed up version of ways that we can start to track progression and how empowering it is for patients to be able to start to tell their story in a scientifically accurate, sound, quantified way. And not only is it fun to track your progression, it is especially fun to track your lack of progression. I mean, this was one day of my clinic. I just took all the patients I saw in one day, and this was the progression scores of my patients. Some of these people are going back to 2016, 2017. It is really, really fun, not just for you, the patient, but for me, the doctor, to see that some of this stuff might be working. Like, it's really, really neat when the community has this idea that Parkinson's is progressive and irreversible. And you have example after example of people who are actually doing really well with this disease year after year after year, and they don't seem to be getting worse over time. That in and of itself is motivation, not only for you to keep going, but for me to keep going. So step 2, where do you want to go? You know where you're starting from. Where do you want to go? Every one of these green dots is a real person with Parkinson's disease. Some people are in amazing shape 20 years post-diagnosis. Some people are in horrible shape a year or two after diagnosis. Some of you, I show this graph to some my patients, and some people zoom in on that green zone and they look at that and they say, I'm going to be a dot that you have never seen before. I'm going to make it to 30 years post-diagnosis and I'm still going to be in the excellent zone. And then other patients will be like, you know what? If I can cheat a little bit and take a couple of days off, if I can kind of round off the edges and loosen up, no rules on vacation, have a once a week cheat day with my diet and still have a good quality of life, that's good enough for me. One of my relatives said, I'd rather die with my quality of life poor than eat your rabbit food, right? Every one of you is going to have a different value system, different drivers, different motivators, and different goals. So the people who want to be in the green zone the longest are going to have to work harder. And that's also going to depend a lot on where you are. The earlier you get started, this is what an 80% reduction in slope looks like. If you were diagnosed 10 years ago and your score is already 1,000, we can give you an 80, even if you could attain an 80% reduction in slope from now on, it's still not reversal, right? But if we can get to you the day you're diagnosed and get you that same 80% reduction in slope, we're talking about 50 good quality of life years with Parkinson's disease. That's my goal for my patients. I want every one of you to live to your 100th birthday and have your pro-PD score be less than 1,000. I want every day of the rest of your 100 years, you're on your own after that, but until your 100th birthday, I want all of you to consider your quality of life excellent or good. That's my personal goal for caring for my patients with Parkinson's. So the best way I have found to do that, I'm sure there are other ways that other people have found and will find, but the way I'm going about this is something called the positive deviance model. It's a research design. I did not develop it. It came out of Tufts University, but you basically take all the diversity that exists in the field and you ask, who are those people doing unusually well? And what are they doing different than those people doing unusually poorly? And this is not rocket science. This is super easy. My strategy is that until we have a cure, until we know what causes Parkinson's, until somebody tells us how to fix it, my strategy is super simple. Let's find the people who are doing the best. Let's see what they're doing differently. Let me teach all of you to do that. And let's see if all of you start doing better too. Okay. So there are a growing number of apps that are finally allowing us to do that. The APDA has a symptom tracking app. We have the Parkinson's symptom tracking app I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes, and Rune Labs has one called Strive. There are other videos that exist that kind of go into this one a little bit. They're both free. Both of the ones I'm going to talk to you about today are free and available. You should download them both, play around with them. You will see that there are different strengths and weaknesses for each one. The one produced by the American Parkinson's Disease Association tracks medications and has a place for you to ask some questions for your doc. The one that we built does not have that. It just uses the rating scale, the ProPD rating scale that we talked about. So this is the Parkinson's symptom tracking app that we've built. And this is where we are talking, now we get into the map. So now you know how to find out where you are and how to track your progression and set your own goals. So now how do you get to where you want to go? And as I said, it's going to be different for all of you. We are really working hard, not just me, the community are working hard to figure out how to package and deliver the recipe for success. We're not just talking about the red pill or the blue pill anymore, right? High dose, low dose, surgery A or surgery B. We now can say pretty confidently that the most exciting therapeutics that we have for slowing Parkinson's progression look to be exercise, diet, some supplements, and a good night's sleep. So that is hard to dose and deliver. So there are a whole bunch of us who are kind of working on ways to package and deliver health lifestyle modification. Dr. Subramanian has been running a program called Holistic. I have my online Parkinson's school. There are a bunch of Power has a great online course. Rogue and Daily Dose have these community-based online programs where people can bond together and learn while they get some of their educational needs met. A couple different people have retreats that you can go away for a week. We have ours at Bastyr. We have a camp that people come to for a week, and Becky Farley has a similar camp down in Arizona that people go to for a week. We are all looking for what is the best way to teach you succinctly, efficiently, effectively, and sustainably how to change your lifestyle in such a way that it will improve your outcomes over time. The other thing that I want to make sure that you know is that this is so highly personalized. I mean, I don't expect you to be able to see or follow that flow diagram. I just want to let you know that every single person on the back end in clinic is treated differently. It isn't like, oh, you have tremor, take dopamine. There are multi-step algorithms. Oh, if this, then that. If that, then this. If this, then go there. And so for each clinical intervention, we personalize it. That is where medicine is going. It's not symptom A, medicine B. It is, where does this person fall on the algorithm? And so as we start to develop some of these treatment algorithms for Parkinson's, I think what we're going to see is people get better, like more personalized care. But we also are able to deliver personalized care in a way that is consistent and predictable and reproducible and transparent. So I think that that's where personalized medicine is going on the treatment end. I will just say up front, the data looks like you get out what you put in. I was watching a really great talk recently on exercise in Parkinson's, where they were basically quoting all these references showing that the data really says the longer you exercise, the better. The more intensely you exercise, the better. The more cognitively challenging, the better, right? And we are actually seeing the same thing. The more vegetables you eat, the better. The more fresh herbs and spices, the better. The more money you have, the better. The more friends you have, the better. We are seeing a dose response curve. Our data from this vantage point, as far as we've gotten, the first 3,000 people in the first 8 years, looks like you get out what you put in. We don't yet know how much each of these things contribute to the overall rate of your progression. We are working on that right now. It is one of the most fun statistical projects I've ever participated in. But what we are asking the data is, when you increase your exercise, when you change your diet, at the end of the day, how does that shape the overall rate of your disease progression? And I will tell you the data very clearly says that your personal financial health, your social health, whether you're lonely, have a lot of friends, how much exercise you get, your diet and your supplement use, absolutely matter. I've been working for many years on different ways to teach you what we are learning, right? And I think that when you're all sitting here looking for a plan, how do I decide what my strategy is going to be? You should learn from the existing research. We have 30 years of data saying that people who eat more fruits and vegetables are less likely to get Parkinson's. The more dairy a person eats, the less likely they are, the more likely they are to get Parkinson's disease. Like, learn from that. We have those data. Let's put it to use. Let's learn from them, learn from other patients. My third grade teacher said, every single person you meet is your teacher. Some people will teach you what you do want to be like, and some people will teach you what you don't want to be like. But everyone is your teacher. Learn from your peers and experiment on yourself. Collect data. I want you to go get your Parkinson's symptom severity score today. Start an exercise program for the next month and get it again. And I believe that you being able to see improvement in your own score is going to motivate you to keep going with that exercise program. I think you visually laying eyes on your own improvement, that trend line getting better, it's going to motivate you. Like I said, I have worked on, the size of the font is proportional to the impact. Fresh vegetables are better for you than fresh herbs. Diet soda is worse for you than juice. So I am looking for all these different ways that we might be able to convey to you how to eat, for instance, taking diet with Parkinson's. But this is what the data looks like. We can see that the more fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts and seeds, non-fried fish, coconut oil, olive oil, wine, green tea, eggs, oatmeal, brown rice, teff, quinoa, millet, those ancient grains a person eats, the better they do over time. Conversely, the more dairy, beef, pork, chicken, fried food, soda, drinking out of plastic bottles, and eating out of cans a person does, the faster their rate of progression. I cannot tell you that drinking diet soda is going to make your disease progress faster, but I can tell you with tremendous confidence that the people who are doing worse are drinking more diet soda than the people who are doing really well. We see the same thing with exercise. So what these data show, using this rating scale that I just showed you, the PRO-PD, you can see that the more exercise a person gets, the less symptomatic they are. This is called a radar chart. And you can see the blue and the blue line are people who have gotten 0 days of exercise in the last week. The orange line are people who have done 1 to 2 days a week of exercise, 1 to 2 days of exercise in the last week. What I want you to notice is there is no difference between the blue line and the orange line. The first 2 days don't really help symptoms all that much. There is no symptomatic improvement associated with 2 days a week of exercise. However, when you bump it up to 3 to 5 days a week, that's the gray line, you see the burden of disease start to shrink. You bump it up to 6 to 7 days a week, the yellow line. We are now talking about a 50% reduction in Parkinson's disease symptom severity in people who are doing 6 to 7 days a week of exercise. So how do we get to the fuel? As I said, it's important to know where you're starting from. We want to know where you want to get to. You need direction, you need a map. And as my patient said, we also need fuel. And that's where I think meetings like this come in. For me personally, I am fueled by education. Once I learn why something is useful, it's easier for me to stay the course. I think a sense of community, whether it's an obligation to another person or feeling like you're part of a group, I think is an excellent source of fuel. Gratitude is a source of fuel, motivation for a lot of people. And kind of these superficial things like keeping lists and scheduling appointments. I know on the days when I have nothing scheduled, I'm much lazier than on the days when I have 5 things on my schedule, right? If I put it on my schedule, I rise to the challenge and I get it done. If there's nothing on my schedule, it's kind of a lazy day, right? So you have to figure out what motivates you. It's easier to steer a moving ship. I understand that apathy is real, and it is hard to learn how to eat a new diet when you're 75 years old. It is hard to find the motivation to join an exercise class or show up. The analogy I like to use with my patients is that you work fine. It's your starter that doesn't work. The analogy I like to use is push starting a car, which people under the age of 40 don't know what I'm talking about. It's really funny to see the next generation of Parkinson's patients not understand this analogy at all. But just like we used to pop the clutch when someone's giving you a push to start the car. Once the car's running, you're fine. You're fine. The car works fine. And that's how most people with Parkinson's are. Once they're going, they're fine, right? So use those tricks. Tell yourself it's not that you don't want to exercise. You just need a push start. And whether that push start is I committed to a 3-month class, or I told my friend Betty I would meet her in the park at 3:00 tomorrow to go for a walk. Find creative ways to increase the likelihood of you building a program that you are likely to stick with. But remember, it's not that you have the issue, it's just you getting started. That's the issue. So in summary, there are a growing number of tools available to help you track your symptoms, your rate of progression or lack thereof, and communicate with your provider. For the first time in 200 years, we finally have a tool that allows you to quantify, apply a number to your symptom severity. With the push of a button, you can now generate a nice 1-page PDF report that you can email or print and bring into your clinic visit. And the patients are finally starting to be able to choose from a variety of apps and devices that are helping them describe and better articulate their symptoms. So thank you very much to the APDA for putting on the series and inviting me to be a part of it. And I have a very brief little video. Some people, one of the problems that we have run into, I've noticed in patients using this app, is people get a little confused that once you download it and register, you do have to go over to your email and say, yes, this is in fact my correct email address and this is me. And then you go back to the app. So what I would like to do is just play. So this is a quick video. She goes fast on it. So she goes to the Google Play Store. She types in Parkinson's symptom tracking app. It comes right up at the top. This is the logo. She's installing it. And then she opens it, and down at the bottom, it says create an account. And so she's going to click create an account. Let's forward this part. She enters her. What diagnosis do you have? When were you diagnosed? So this is where people are getting screwed up. You verify your account. So she has to go over to her email address and say, if it went to her junk email, she found it in her junk, good notice. And see where it says validate account? She clicks those blue words, validate account. And that is it. Verify your email. We're done. And she has officially registered. So now she can go back to the app. She can log in, and for the rest of her life, she's logged in. And anytime she wants to get a new score, all she has to do is say get new score, and we will track it. We will monitor it. We'll track it. We will monitor it. We will not solicit you with anything. We will not share your data with anybody. We are working on some back end strategies where, should you ask our permission, we could share your results with your movement disorder doc or your physical therapist. But we have not opened that up right now. And so one, that would never, ever happen without your express permission. You would have to actually enter in, this is my doctor's name, this is their code, and I give them permission for the next 12 months or 5 years to follow my symptoms. So that is in the works because other providers have been asking for it, but that's not available yet. But it's something I hope to be able to add, because I know it's absolutely invaluable to me when I go start my clinic day to look to see who's coming in and how are they doing. And I want other doctors other than me to have access to being able to do that. All right, so I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Very, very interesting. I love your whack-a-mole analogy. I love the analogy of taking the offensive, being your own coach kind of thing. So interesting. So we do have some questions from the audience. So I want to remind you that the Q&A function is where you want to type your question in. There is one question in the chat that I'm going to go to first, and then I'm going to go over to the Q&A. So 6 to 7 days of exercise, you showed that slide where it shows a 50% reduction in symptoms. Can you define exercise in terms of time and activity?
Yeah. So the way we asked the question for that graph was, on how many of the last 7 days have you done at least 30 minutes of exercise? That's it. Whatever you call exercise, whether it's gardening, whether it's jumping rope, whether it's boxing, we just asked 30 minutes, how many days a week? So that's a pretty low bar, honestly. My hunch is, if we had actually started to get into, well, what about the people who play pickleball for an hour and then go for a walk after dinner? My hunch is that is going to get even better.
Great, thank you. And there's lots of resources out there. The ones that you showed on your slide, and APDA has virtual free exercise classes, from Tai Chi to yoga to high intensity exercise. So they're out there. And the community programs are back online since the COVID pandemic, many of them. So, you know, you can call us. We'll try to get you connected, or email us. Okay, so first question from the Q&A. Are we supposed to answer the questions from the app considering we're on or off medication?
Fabulous question, and the most difficult one that I have to answer. So the correct answer is, I want you to average, right? Which is a really hard thing to ask some people to do, especially when you have profound offs and profound ons. There are people who are like, man, 50% of the week asymptomatic. My symptoms are totally under control. The other 50% of the time, I am off and completely non-functional, right? So what I'm asking you to do is, on average, over the last week, how symptomatic has your tremor been? And I want you to kind of zoom back and think, how much of a pain in the butt has tremor been this week, all told? And it's probably going to be about half the time, 50%. But right now, and I know that's not ideal. And I know a lot of you are really frustrated and annoyed by my asking you to do something as inaccurate as estimate something that is highly variable. But here's the deal. The reason all of the other scales stink as bad as they do is because this is a highly fluctuating disease. And when we only look at you when you're on, or only look at you when you're off, it messes up the data, because it's not a true reflection of your life with PD. And so most studies have to enroll thousands of people to drown out the background noise of the fluctuations. The reason this scale works so much better is because we've risen above the fluctuations. I've gotten rid of the fluctuations because I've asked you to get rid of the fluctuations. I've asked you to tell us, all told, this week, how bad has constipation been? And because you're giving us a weekly average, the scale becomes much better, because we don't have the fluctuations anymore. You're getting rid of that for us, and we can work with better data. So as imprecise as it is, it's still better. than a snapshot in time.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this question is about kind of comorbidities. So this person has a diagnosis of, fibromyalgia, arthritis, Parkinson's, bipolar. The question is, and other people have all these comorbidities, how do I differentiate among them regarding symptoms? You have any advice for them?
Great. Don't overthink it. You are not other people. You might find that because of your rheumatoid arthritis, your best Parkinson score is never below a 600. It's not really a Parkinson's thing. It's really more attributable to other stuff. But we're after your optimal, right? So this scale is actually much, much better when you compare it to you than when you compare it to other people. Right? Because there are Pollyannas out there and there are Eeyores out there. And there are some people who have a little tremor and they're like, it's the worst thing I've ever had in my entire life. It's horrible. It's debilitating. And another person can have that same tremor and be like, no, that barely gets in my way. Doesn't even bother me. Forget I have it sometime. And so the thing that we know as researchers are those types of people don't go back and forth. A Pollyanna is always a Pollyanna. They don't become grabby old grouches who think everything's horrible. Eeyores stay Eeyores and Pollyannas stay Pollyannas. And as long as your definition of severe constipation is somewhat steady, it's going to be pretty steady. And so we're not comparing you so much to other people as much as we are trying to get you to your own personal best. The other thing I'm going to say is there are a whole bunch of symptoms that are Parkinson's related that you don't realize are symptoms of Parkinson's. Right? People with Parkinson's are more likely to tear a rotator cuff. Right? How do most people would not attribute that to Parkinson's? Like, oh, I'm just in pain right now because of my rotator cuff. Well, how do you know the rotator cuff isn't part of the Parkinson's thing? So don't overthink it. Just tell us what your symptoms have been, and your goal is to get your personal best.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what it's causing. It's about feeling your best, for sure. Great. So diagnosis year, it's all over the place, So when they're filling in what year they were diagnosed, this person's saying they're like chasing the exact diagnosis date. I'm not sure because my precursor started 25 years ago, but then I got this thing. So she just choose the day that somebody said, you do indeed have Parkinson's, or what's the suggestion?
Yep, it's the one thing that ties us all. Every single person at the day of diagnosis has had symptoms for years. And we can't have some people starting with their restless leg in high school and other people starting with their loss of smell 8 years ago. And like, we can't, was the anxiety I had in my 20s early Parkinson's, or is that just anxiety? I mean, we can't have people trying to figure out whether some of these early non-motor symptoms were Parkinson's or not. That's going to mess everything up. What we know is that if we get everybody on the same page, the day of diagnosis, and know that this disease was underway for a decade or two before that, that is the one day that by the time you are symptomatic enough to have a doctor tell you this looks like Parkinson's, that's your starting date, and then we can go from there.
Okay, great. If someone's having troubles with the app, where do they go with that? What's the help button look like?
There is an email address on the app page, on the app that you can email, and I will type it into the chat.
Okay, great. Sometimes apps just have trouble sometimes. So, okay. So you talked about who's on your team, building your team, like assessing this. If you're the coach. So what would you say, who are your basic essentials for your team besides, say, your neurologist? Or is your neurologist even that key person on your team?
Especially yes, is the short answer. I mean, if you have an opportunity, 50% of the people in the United States who have Parkinson's get their care from a primary care provider. And there's actually data that people who get their care from a neurologist do better than people who get their care from PCPs, and people who work with movement disorder docs do better than people who work with neurologists. So we have two problems here. One, we don't have enough movement disorder docs to help as many people as need help. So not all of you can see a movement disorder doc or a neurologist. Many of you live in underserved areas where you don't even have access to a movement disorder doc. And for those of you who are lucky enough to be in the vicinity of a neurologist or a movement disorder doc, absolutely, they're going to be a key player of your team if that's available to you. Certainly, movement disorder docs are going to really be more important if you're not levodopa responsive, if you're not doing well, if there's something that's not seeming to be right? Like if things aren't working the way that they should, that's where you need to call in the big guns and say, hey, do we have the right diagnosis? What are we missing? Are we thinking about this the right way? That's more than ever where I think it's really important to get neurologists and movement disorder docs on board. But yeah, some of you are just working with your primary care docs, and we need to do the best we can. And that's where you complement, get the care that you can, the meds that you need from the docs that you have available. But the average MD gets, I think, 4 hours of nutrition education during their entire medical school curriculum. Like, you can ask your doc all you want, should I change my diet? I'm telling you, most of them don't know what they're talking about. Like they've never learned about nutrition and diet. I mean, any more than what they may have done on their own since school, but medical schools are not teaching the questions that some of you are asking. So depending on if you're asking about supplements and herbs and diet and exercise, you might find, as great as your neurologist is at prescribing meds and dialing in, optimizing your treatment, they absolutely stink at guiding you on lifestyle choices. And alternatively, you may have the best functional medicine doc or naturopathic doc in the world who's all full of their lifestyle recommendations for you, but they don't know what they're talking about by way of med management, right? And so each one of you is going to have to interview some people in your community. This is where the support groups are gold. I mean, I truly think the best part of a support group is not even it's talking about the doctors behind our backs and finding out who's good and who's not. Like, share notes, talk about who are the best physical therapists in town, who is your best massage, who gives the best massages, and share those notes with one another, because you're all doing that homework. So, share your resources with one another.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to go to a couple of the things that you found from tracking this data for so long. One question about not drinking from plastic bottles. What about BPA-free plastic bottles? Is it BPA or?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah. You're not asking, are you drinking from plastic bottles? Is it BPA-free? It's just plastic.
Well, I mean, and I'll tell you, eating out of cans is even worse than drinking out of plastic bottles. And we're trying to figure out, is it the metal? Is it the BPA lining? Is it that the green beans that wind up in cans are most heavily sprayed with pesticides? I mean, we don't know why. And everyone, we were only asking about canned fruits and vegetables. And then when we saw how strong the data was, we start, well, what about canned water? What about, canned sardines? What about, and the answer is yes, canned beans are coming up positive. Canned water is coming up positive. This is a treat. I don't do that all the time, by the way. But really, I mean, there's something with cans that isn't looking good. And so the type of research I do is called pragmatic research. I can't tell you why something is the way that it is. I can only tell you what makes people do better or worse.
Mm-hmm. And I remember a talk that you did a couple years ago, and you're like, I love to learn this stuff, but you were talking about carrots. Like, what if it said that carrots are curing Parkinson's? Big carrot, there is no such thing as big carrot. They're not going to fund a study about that. So that's where, you kind of have to experiment with yourself, right? And you have to go with that pragmatic data. So yeah, it's very super interesting.
And to the person who asked the question, if given the choice between a typical plastic bottle and a BPA-free, I absolutely go BPA-free.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. What about drinking black tea? Why is that problematic? Do you have any clue on that? Or was that on your problematic?
I don't think it was on the bad. I don't think it was on the bad list. I don't remember it being green tea, black tea. I think black tea didn't make the good list. I think green tea made the good list. Black tea was neutral. But I wouldn't think of black tea as bad. In fact, most of the evidence throughout history suggests that any caffeine containing beverage tends to do well by Parkinson's disease.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some of the questions are very the ones that are left are very specific to different symptoms and treatments and things like that. Do you want to go there, or you want to keep this very focused on?
Individual symptoms, probably not. I think that's going to
Yeah.
open up a can of worms that's not relevant to most of the audience. Someone's asking, how often should I use the school? I don't know if you mean the app. So I think that's an important thing to touch on. So when you register for the app, we give you the choice. One, we say, can we send you a notice? And all a notice is it pops up on your phone and says, it's time to take your Pro PD again. And we give you the choice. Do you want to do it weekly, monthly, or quarterly? If you are stable, you barely think about your Parkinson's, this is just in the background of your life, your meds are stable, your diet's stable, you're doing quite well, set it for quarterly. If you are in the middle of a change, you're about to go vegan, you're about to double your levodopa dose, you're about to add amantadine, take it today and take it once a week for the next 3 weeks. Let's see, is it making a difference? Can you see a measurable improvement in real time? Right? If you're doing a symptomatic therapy, like a dopamine-based thing, you should see improvement by the end of them, within week after week for the next couple of weeks. You know, if you're starting a new exercise program or changing your diet, you know, it might take a month or two. But the more aggressive you are experimenting and trying to optimize your life and change, the more often you should do it. I've been doing it once a week now for a couple months, and it takes less than 3 to 5 minutes for me to do it now that I'm registered. In terms of the school, the online school, we have, check out the schedule, but you know, on the 14th of every month, we have a different speaker tell their story. I give a big update at the end on the 28th of every month with a different topic. So people use it depending on what their personal goals are.
And I'll send a link to that out in your post-event email. One person did ask a question in the chat about some of the retreats you mentioned. Is there room in this summer's Parkinson's summer school?
Yes, because I haven't gotten my email out to my patients yet. So, but yes, we just opened registration a couple of weeks ago. And because I have been a slacker at telling people that registration is open, we still have about half of our slots open right now. But yeah, it's the first week in August, and it is the best thing that I do. It's the best thing I have to offer, but people come from all over, really the world, but all over the country, Canada, and they check themselves in for 1 week, and we feed you the right food. We've got movement disorder docs and physical therapists, and Jen comes, and I mean, it's good. It's good. It's the best thing I do for Parkinson's in the course of a year.
Yes, excellent. Well, and I will put a link then to that in your post-event email. You're going to have all sorts of information in your post-event event email. So I'm trying to see if there's any more questions that are really relevant to this in the chat or elsewhere. I will also put the email address that if you are having trouble with the app once you've downloaded and you're trying it, I will put that in your post-event email. I did see one note that I wanted to read in full, but now I can't find it, but something about how they've been seeing you and that people are asking them these questions like, do you really have Parkinson's? Because they're doing so well. So it was a great compliment. And then someone else said something about loving your pragmatic views. And someone else was like something and said, I just love you. So, you know, so there's your kudos to take you through the weekend. And I think with that, oh my gosh, there's so many questions, but I think that I am going to have to end the program since we have gone over time, as we always do. But I will send out these slides. I will send you links to all sorts of stuff in your post-event email. And I will be putting the recording up. I will also send you some more information about upcoming APDA programs. We have a powerful tools for caregivers class. We have a newly diagnosed series where we do talk about how do you build your team? What does this look like? How do you become your own coach? So we have a great 8-week program that covers that. We're going to have a regatta in Seattle in June. So I'll send you information about that for those of you that are local. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's webinar and We hope that you'll consider supporting APDA through a donation. That's how we do what we do. And please do feel free to reach out to us locally, reach out to our national office. We are here to assist, to provide you information and referrals, and connect you with other people, support groups, information, all that kind of stuff. So any parting words, Laurie? Anything you want to say?
A couple of people asked questions about supplements, and when Jen sends out the email, I will also send you a link. We just published a paper on the 12 supplements associated with slower Parkinson's progression. So we will send a link to that published paper because it's peer reviewed and not me just throwing supplement names out, but you can look at it in context.
Excellent. Wonderful. So I'll put that in your post-event email. My goodness, everybody, you're going to have to look for my post-event email. So it'll take me a while to put together, but I will do it next week. So thank you very much for your time, Laurie. I hope you enjoy the sunshine that we're getting and that you just have a wonderful weekend. And to all of you that joined us, thank you so much for joining us on today's program. We hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time on another program.
Thanks for hosting.
Bye.